This is Roll for Crit, and we're here to bring you our review of a documentary that is set in the world of tabletop gaming called Gamemaster. This comes from director Charles Mraz. It's his directorial debut, full-length documentary that is available on iTunes right now. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's great. If you're going to do that, that's perfectly awesome. And I'm glad that a lot of people do that. But I thought this movie showed a different side of the design industry where some of these people, they're really bringing their own backgrounds and their personal life history. So their games aren't just, oh, this is just something fun I came up with. It actually is important to them in a meaningful way and speaks to who they are. I think the standout example probably is this game I mentioned, Arranged, which was designed by a woman from Pakistan about arranged marriages and her own actual experiences trying to avoid people who wanted her to marry their sons and whatnot, and not being into the idea of the arranged marriage at all, and how that impacted her own relationship with her family. And that's something that you see all the time, I feel like, in books and movies, but it's almost never at the forefront, at least that we know about, in terms of a board game. So I really appreciate being able to see that angle of it.
I mean, these topics are important. I think part of the issue is with same thing with video games. We're still seen as a toy. So, compared to a movie or a book, people aren't like, oh, you went through a meaningful journey. It's still like, oh, it's a game. And we're making progress there. But as you said, it's really interesting to see this kind of stuff. I think it's also important that I forget the name of the designer, but how like Exploding Kittens was like the super successful Kickstarter. Then we see one that wasn't successful. And how they come back from that and how he has to change the things up for that. Especially, he talks about because he's a big miniature fan, I remember. And then he's decided to go for standees because they're cheaper. And as someone who, I like a lot of games with miniatures, but I also am like, I really do love those standee editions now I see some Kickstarters do. It's interesting to see the other side. It's not just like, oh, I want to make money. It's like, no, I love miniatures. It's how I want to play the game.
Yeah, that was a real interesting eye-opener too, because this is a guy who was talking about creating a game, the game Thug Life, which is themed around, growing up in lower income urban areas. And he was saying how when he was a kid, he was making a game that he wouldn't have been able to afford when he was a kid. And it's that struggle between, you want to make the best product that you can, but when it comes to something like that, you also, you want people to be able to buy it and play it. So how do you strike that balance? It's hard. Another interesting theme that I saw throughout the movie was coming back to family relationships, in some cases directly. For Charlie Bink and their Trekking Across the Park scheme, he worked with his parents on designing that game. Like, they all had a shared love of national parks. And I mean, that's a whole other side of a business and a relationship. I can't even get my parents to play a board game with me, let alone design and sell a board game with me.
No, I've done more of the design, not designing a board game, but working with parents. It's an interesting test, to say the least. And I completely understand where he was coming from with a lot of the descriptions he was talking about there and the choices you have to make. And, I'd say an interesting thing that I don't know if this will still be relevant in like a few years after this video, but, watching all this, and it just reminded me so much of how isolated I've been these last few months. From people in board games. Like, we've been playing online and stuff, but this really hit home for me. I think this is the first time it's like, I have not sat at a table with anyone. We have not just had a game night for the sake of a game night.
It is a little bit shocking to see the footage of conventions where there's just hundreds and hundreds of people in a big room playing games together, and it's like, oh wow, yeah, that's a thing that we're not doing this year.
I didn't look too hard, but I was tempted to pause during all the Gen Con and be like, all right, do I see us somewhere in the background?
Yeah, anytime there's footage of a convention, I'm always looking for us. But yeah, I didn't see us pop up anywhere. But we were there, I'm pretty sure, the years that they were filming. So yeah, that is something too that any movie about this subject now takes on a new meaning in some ways, certainly. But I think that even in years to come, you're going to be able to watch this, whether you're a designer, like an aspiring game designer, or if you're just interested in the hobby. I think this does a really good job covering a large variety of topics briefly, not delving into any of them too deeply. It also talks about sales of games and the effect of the Spiel des Jahres award, all kinds of fascinating stuff, but it's enough of a dip into the pool that I think it's very easy to comprehend everything. It's very, very watchable. I definitely think it's entertaining. I enjoyed my time watching it. One of the things I really liked, there was a quote from Donald Vaccarino, the creator of Dominion, who talked about what he feels are the 3 elements of a game. And they boiled down to theme, mechanics, and data. And I always thought about theme and mechanics, but then he added in data, which was like not just how the game plays, but then like what the game is storing and what it's telling you as you play.
We've actually have talked about, we just never called it that. Think about like the big data point you and I always tend to stress is victory points. We've talked about how whether you show all the victory points, you can sort of see a lead in. If you feel bad, then you get the king making. Hide that data, however, everyone still feels like they have skin in the game usually, unless there's something so obvious. So it's something you don't think about and you realize, oh, that is important.
Yeah, it's so that's one of the things that it's always great to me to hear different designers and their perspectives and how they bring these things to light that maybe I never thought about or just wasn't conscious in the way I was thinking about it. Another one, going back to family relationships, is Klaus Teuber, the creator of Catan, who now his family helps him sell that game and works on that game with him. And it's fascinating to see where the industry is at now, where it was 20 years ago, where it's going to go in the next 20 years. So I definitely enjoyed my time watching Gamemaster. Anything else that jumped out at you from it, or final thoughts?
No, I think final thought overall, it's a great video that covers a lot of the major points you'd want someone who's getting into the board game industry. I mean, you got all the designers, you got the major conventions, awards, most of the people you'd want to hear on there and stuff, and also maybe some more interesting topics and how things are sold and whatnot. But it just goes enough to explain it. But like I said, I think a lot of these topics could have their own video.
Yeah, we would love to see a full mini series come out of this. What do you think about who would you recommend this to? Hardcore gamers versus people who have never seen games before. I think that's always something to discuss when it comes to a movie like this. Do you think this is something anybody on iTunes could check out and enjoy?
I'm gonna have to say, first off, if you're just new to the industry, so you're like, oh, I've played Catan, or I want to be a board game designer, definitely watch this first, because they have tips and tricks and things that you may be interested in know and maybe how to explore. If you're more of a heavy gamer, you might know some of these things, but like I said, these topics are still interesting. If you're the kind of person who likes to look behind the curtain, this is still going to have a lot to offer.
Again, the movie is called Gamemaster, and we both enjoyed our time watching it. You will definitely glean some new insight into the process behind games from all different facets that you probably haven't fully considered before unless you're a designer yourself. It's out there on iTunes right now, and we'll have a link in the description below so you can check it out for yourself. And let us know in the comments once you're finished what you thought of it and what different takeaways you had from watching the movie. Because again, I think it covers so much that there are all these different angles that you could come out with a very different thing that sticks in your head that you want to discuss.
Until then, I'm Will.
I'm Jonathan.
And this has been Roll for Crit.
We would love it if you liked and subscribed to this channel and supported us on Patreon as well.
If you choose to support us, turn to page 25.